3 in the morning. A horse that looked perfectly healthy the day before is now standing in the middle of the stall, drenched in sweat, refusing to move. This isn't bad temper and it isn't fatigue. This is a physiological emergency. The instinct is to look for someone or something to blame. A bad batch of hay, a sudden injury. But emergency equine clinic records tell a different story. These crises rarely show up without warning. Catch the signs early and most of them can be prevented, because what looks sudden is usually the tail end of a process that started, unnoticed, weeks earlier. Part of the problem starts with how we think about horse care. A stable, quality feed, a good trainer. If those boxes are checked, we assume everything's fine. The reality is different. A horse's body doesn't run on our schedule. It has its own rhythm, and that rhythm is easier to disrupt than most people realize. The difference between a healthy companion and an emergency case isn't found in expensive tack. It's in the quiet, day-to-day management of the digestive system. Case histories tell the same story again and again. Small changes pile up until the last one triggers a serious breakdown. So it's not enough to ask, what do we do in an emergency? The real question is where the chain could have been broken before it ever got to that point. What keeps a horse on a healthy track and what tips it into crisis? That's what this video looks at. If you want more of this kind of breakdown, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Horse care tends to get judged by appearance. Gleaming tack, spotless stalls, high-end equipment. If everything looks good, we assume the horse is healthy. But that view shifts the focus to aesthetics. Owners can end up investing in visible signals while missing what's actually going on inside the animal. A horse isn't a creature that stays strong automatically just because the stall is clean. Its body runs on its own system. When the attention is on equipment, the real facts can slip by. Some of it comes down to watching what the horse eats, how much it drinks, and how it moves when no one's paying attention. If this perspective is useful to you, feel free to share it in the comments. These early warning signs might reach another owner whose horse needs to hear them. The first issue is hidden in the anatomy of the stomach. A horse's stomach is built to process small amounts of roughage for most of the day, and it keeps producing acid even when it's empty. A horse isn't built to stay completely still, even at rest. Grazing and slow movement help keep the gut working. When roughage gets cut off for long stretches, the system doesn't just switch to standby. Digestion may slow down, but acid production keeps going. The horse's body doesn't change just because our schedule did. That's where the problem starts. Squeeze an animal that's used to grazing all day into one big meal and long stretches of standing still, and it can take a while before the consequences show up. An average adult horse's daily water needs are substantial. How much it drinks depends heavily on its size, its feed, the weather, and its workload. That water maintains the fluid balance the gut needs to keep moving. This isn't a nice-to-have. It's a basic physiological requirement. Without constant access to clean water, the risk of dehydration, impaction, and colic goes up. Digestive problems are rarely explained by one dramatic meal. They usually come from days of inadequate intake, or from a water source that's technically there but not really accessible. In a busy barn, the water trough is often the most overlooked piece of equipment there is. Water sitting in a bucket doesn't mean the horse is actually drinking enough. Stale, dirty, or frozen water cuts down on how much it drinks, and if access is difficult, or another horse is guarding the trough, the horse will drink less. The bucket isn't the proof. The horse's actual drinking behavior is. Any change in water intake, appetite, or manure is a signal worth paying attention to. The water system keeps things moving. Roughage supplies the fuel the gut was built to process. There's a common mistake here, treating the grain bag as the health plan. Grain and concentrated feeds are really precision tools, used for heavy workload, growth, or gaps in the ration, not as a substitute for roughage. The digestive system wasn't designed for large doses of starch. It was designed for a fiber-rich diet. When roughage takes a back seat and grain intake goes up, gut balance can be thrown off. The horse shows this sometimes through appetite, sometimes through posture, sometimes through manure. It's easy to assume a horse that's gaining weight is healthy. But visible weight alone doesn't tell you the gut is working well on the inside. The easiest moment to overlook is the arrival of a new bag of feed. Owners tend to treat this as a small logistical change, but the horse's internal microbial ecosystem actually has to adapt to a new fuel source. If new grain or hay is introduced too fast, that ecosystem is being asked to change faster than it can keep up. This is exactly where the 14-day transition rule becomes the critical line between routine management and digestive trouble. This isn't optional, it's a biological necessity. New feed needs to be introduced gradually, cutting back the old feed as you go, with enough time for the microorganisms to adjust. The plan won't look the same for every horse, but the logic is simple. Change slowly and keep watching the horse. Most owners already know this. The hard part is not rushing it, even when the old feed is almost gone. The reason for the change might be about human convenience, but the pace of adjustment always belongs to the horse. Timing also shapes the relationship between feeding and exercise. When an owner tacks up and heads into the arena, they're often not thinking about how the timing of that work interacts with digestion. Starting intense work right after a big meal can cause real discomfort, and from the outside, that can just look like the horse acting up. A horse might pin its ears, shorten its stride, or resist moving forward. Don't read that straight as disobedience. There may be discomfort underneath it. If that discomfort keeps happening, the horse can start associating work with pain. The owner sees a training problem. The horse remembers the pressure. Putting some time between the heaviest meal and intense work can ease this. If a horse is resisting, look at its care routine and possible pain before you increase the pressure. Consistency in the daily routine is the invisible backbone of a horse's health. A horse doesn't know weekdays from weekends. What it knows is that feed, movement, rest, and social contact show up in a certain order. When feeding or turnout times suddenly shift because of our schedule, the rhythm the horse is used to gets thrown off. It looks minor, but the body feels it. A constantly shifting schedule can create a kind of stress that's hard to spot. Staying as consistent as possible, from turnout time to exercise, tells the horse's body what to expect. Hoof care is usually thought of as a periodic service, but the issue isn't just the foot. It's the whole body. A horse carries its full weight on those 4 feet, all day, every day. When hoof balance is off, the effects can travel all the way from the legs to the back. When a horse shows lameness, an owner might check the muscles first, but the root of the problem is usually closer to the ground. A farrier visit every 6 to 8 weeks is the common standard, though the exact interval depends on the horse, the season, and the workload. A horse will change how it moves to protect a sore foot. Then other muscles take on the extra load, and a small hoof problem can spread through the entire body. Grooming isn't just about making the coat shine. It's really a small, daily physical checkup. While brushing, an owner might notice heat, swelling, tenderness, or a small wound that wasn't there the day before. Every horse has its own baseline. One always rests the same hind leg after work. Another turns toward you the moment it sees the brush. If a normally calm horse suddenly startles, or goes unusually quiet, something may have changed. Knowing its baseline is what lets you catch a small problem before it grows into a bigger one. The same principle carries over from the horse to its environment. A pasture isn't just an empty space where a horse gets turned out. It's part of feeding, movement, social life, and parasite management. There's no single number for how much pasture a horse needs. Soil quality, climate, the amount of grass, and how many horses share the space all change that need. When a pasture is overused, clean grass becomes scarce, and horses spend less time in the contaminated areas. Rotating the space can ease that pressure. Well-managed turnout encourages movement and supports both digestion and mental well-being. The environment isn't separate from the horse. It's part of the system that keeps the horse healthy. Annual veterinary care rounds out this picture. Vaccines, teeth, parasite control, nutrition, and movement are all reviewed based on each horse's individual risk. Tetanus is considered a core vaccine. Influenza is given based on risk, and it matters especially for horses that travel or compete. The schedule isn't a one-size-fits-all list. It's built together with the vet. Teeth are part of this picture too. When chewing becomes painful, a horse may drop feed out of its mouth, eat less roughage, and that can affect digestion. Vet records are a map of change over time. Nutrition, routine, hooves, teeth, and veterinary oversight together form a framework for long-term stability. The goal isn't zero risk, it's cutting down on the preventable human-caused mistakes. The same principle comes into even sharper focus once equipment enters the picture. On a Tuesday morning in 2018, at a high-performance facility in Kentucky, a trainer was dealing with a horse that had been considered unmanageable for 3 months. The horse was sweating, pacing, and refusing to stand still for the bridle. Staff had already moved to a harsher leverage bit and stepped up the intensity of the morning lunging sessions. The horse had been labeled difficult, stubborn, dangerous, but the physical evidence told a different story. The vet didn't start from the label. They looked under the saddle pad and found two dry, matted patches of hair surrounded by dark, damp sweat, the signature of uneven pressure. The saddle tree was warped 3 millimeters on the left side. That small deviation, hidden underneath expensive equipment, was the silent source of the poor performance. When a saddle doesn't sit properly against the back, the pressure becomes uneven and constant. A horse in pain changes its movement pattern to avoid that pressure, and that creates secondary tension in the neck and hindquarters. This isn't only a training issue. A lot of horses labeled difficult are trying to communicate discomfort from tack that's pinching or bridging. That sets up a cycle where a human assumption about behavior ends up hiding an equipment problem. The next response is usually a harsher bit or a heavier training aid, which suppresses the signal without ever removing the cause. Consider the mechanics of the back. The thoracic vertebrae under the saddle are covered in muscles that need to stay flexible so the front legs can extend and the hindquarters can engage. If a saddle is too narrow, or it creates concentrated pressure at certain points, it restricts those muscles and makes it harder for the horse to lift its back. If a rider keeps forcing a horse in pain into collection, the horse compensates by hollowing its back and bracing through the lumbar region. Over time, that pattern can contribute to atrophy in the longissimus dorsi, the large back muscle that helps carry the rider. This decline is rarely dramatic at first. A horse that used to jump cleanly starts brushing the rails. A fluid dressage horse starts moving short and stiff. The animal's personality hasn't changed. Its comfort has. An owner might see a behavioral flaw where a vet or a saddle fitter sees a structural mismatch. Owners can spend thousands of dollars on custom saddles and still miss a horse's seasonal changes. A saddle that fit fine in March can create pressure by August. The mistake isn't always in the equipment itself. It's assuming that a static object will keep fitting a living, changing body without ever being reassessed. The Kentucky case isn't just a story about equipment. It points to a core rule of responsible care. When behavior changes, find out what the horse is trying to communicate before you increase the pressure. That same rule brings us back to the feeding schedule and the 2-week transition window. A new feed doesn't just go into the bucket. It enters a microbial ecosystem that needs time to adjust. If the transition gets compressed into a few days, the digestive balance can be thrown off and the risk of colic goes up. Those 14 days aren't wasted time. They're a practical safety margin. Health is protected not by the most expensive supplement in the bucket, but by patience applied to the schedule. Owners who rush aren't being careless. They're underestimating just how slowly biology wants to adapt. If you've managed a feed transition in your own barn, share what you noticed in the comments. Did appetite, manure, water intake, or behavior change? Those observations can help other owners recognize the same pattern. If this biological timeline helps you make safer calls, consider subscribing for the next evidence-based deep dive. The reason the transition matters shows up in the hindgut, the cecum and colon, where microorganisms ferment fiber. That microbial population needs a stable environment and a steady pH balance. When a new carbohydrate source is introduced too fast, that population can't adapt in time. The hindgut becomes acidic, beneficial microorganisms break down, and harmful byproducts can enter the bloodstream. That can contribute to laminitis, a serious, painful condition that affects the tissue supporting the hoof. Laminitis is a serious threat and calls for immediate veterinary care. The barn office might be full of bills for quality feed, but the most useful document is usually the feeding log: what was eaten, when it was eaten, how the ration changed, and what happened afterward. A gradual transition isn't a delay. It's a protective measure. We often assume better health comes from a more expensive feed, but the gut doesn't care about the brand name. It responds to composition, amount, hydration, and timing. A fast, rigid schedule can ignore the slower rhythm a grazing animal actually needs. Horse health isn't a product you buy. It's a balance you maintain. Once we stop managing a horse like a machine, we can start actually paying attention to this living system that keeps going long after the grooming is done. The most important piece of equipment in the barn might not be the saddle or the fancy blanket. It might be the clock on the wall. The daily log isn't written with the intensity of the latest trend. It's written with the consistency of routine. Modern horse management often turns into a tug-of-war between our desire for efficiency and the horse's need for stable, species-appropriate care. You can see that conflict at training facilities where horses spend most of the day in the stall, get a couple of large meals, and then work hard. It's a picture that's far removed from the natural pattern of frequent roughage and low-intensity movement. When a horse's day gets compressed into extremes, the system becomes more vulnerable. Stomach ulcers have been reported in more than 60% of performance horse groups, and that figure can approach 90% in racehorses. The exact number varies by population, but the management risk isn't a mystery. Long stretches without roughage, limited turnout, transport, stress, and heavy work can all contribute to stomach discomfort. Understanding why a horse is struggling just takes looking at the timeline of its day, the gaps between meals, the time spent outside, the intensity of the work, and then comparing that against the vet and behavior records. The goal of good management isn't to control every movement. It's to build a system that needs fewer corrective interventions because the horse's basic needs are consistently met. 5 practical checks bring that together. First, keep continuous access to clean water and enough roughage. Second, when you change feed, use the full transition period and keep track of what changed. Third, keep feeding, turnout, exercise, and health checks consistent enough to support the horse's internal rhythm. Fourth, count grooming, hoof care, dental work, and saddle checks as early detection tools. Fifth, when a horse's behavior changes, look into pain, equipment, and care conditions before you blame the horse. The next time you walk into the barn, start with one concrete step. Review the past 14 days, feed changes, water intake, turnout time, workload, what you noticed while grooming, and how the tack is fitting. That record can surface a small breakdown before it turns into the next crisis. That's the real measure of a successful partnership, not how much you can buy for a horse, but how many obstacles you've cleared out of the way of the life it's naturally built to live. The record tells the story. Consistency delivers the results. And a horse that can eat comfortably, move freely, rest well, and work soundly, that's the reward that actually matters.